Now back to the Aaron Harber Show.
Welcome back to the show. I'm talking with former Congressman Mickey Edwards. It's interesting when you talked about you were at one point considered one of the most conservative members of Congress, but then today your voting record would actually make you one of the more liberal Republicans.
Yeah, without changing at all.
When you look at leadership, is one of the challenges that the reality is Americans and that leaders view Americans and citizens as feeling so entitled that our leaders are afraid of the electorate. They're afraid of citizens. They're afraid to say, no, we can't keep giving you unlimited benefits.
I think there's some of that. I think we've created, if John Kennedy today said, ask not what your country could do for you, people would gasp and say, oh, but I thought that's what we're supposed to do. This is what I want the government to do for me. So, yeah, there is a lot of that. And it's made worse by the closed party primaries that we talked about, that you have to navigate through to get onto the ballot. So there is a little bit of a diminution in the sense of what is required of a citizen in a democracy. Now, it happens that we now are 320 million people. And you talk to people all the time and they'll say, why can't we have a consensus? Well, here in the studio, you got like half a dozen people. And maybe if 3 or 4 of you decided you're going to go to lunch together after this, you may want to, that you could decide. You could have a consensus of where to go.
Not in this group.
Well, no, but if you expand the whole group, I'll tell you, there's no way. You can't get a consensus. In 320 million people, you can't get a consensus on anything. That means you have to be willing to compromise. And we have set up a system in which the people who don't believe in compromise, the guy Murdoch who beat Dick Lugar in the Republican primary in Indiana for the Senate, said specifically, I don't believe in compromise.
Yeah, I'll never compromise.
Yeah, I'll never compromise. That means that you can't do anything. Why even bother moving to Washington? And so consensus is not possible. Compromise has to be the goal. Now, that doesn't mean selling out your principles. It means you believe A, I believe Z, and we both advocate, and I get as much as I can. You get as much as you can, and at some point we say, okay, we've each got, in the reality of the world we're in and where the electorate is, this is as far as we can go, so we settle for that. People who want national health insurance, people who want single payer and all that. In 1920, the first national health care bill was introduced. It went nowhere. When Harry Truman wrote his memoirs after he left the White House, he said his single biggest disappointment was he never got a national health care bill passed. Well, the first bill introduced in 1920, by 1965, we had national health insurance for seniors and for the elder, for seniors and for the poor. Then we have it for veterans, and then we added a prescription drug thing, and things move incrementally. We have to be willing to say we are a big group of people, here I got to make this point. Liberals, and I am not one, seem to believe the government ought to be able to do anything that we think would be cool. Conservatives seem to think, the government's not allowed to do anything. So the founders wanted limits on government, but they wanted a government. They wanted us to be a country, and they wanted a government that could act. And so it was both empowerment and constraint. And all the Democrats and liberals can see is the empowerment, and all the Republicans and conservatives can see is the constraint. And you just think, oh my God, Benjamin Franklin must be saying, I was right to be uncertain, about this, because it's been really, we need a better citizenry too. I hate to say that.
Well, when you look at money in campaigns, when you look at the benefits that we want as citizens, I think there's some commonalities. On the campaign side, for example, you have a lot of corporate and business interests in what happens in government, because government bestows significant benefits, whether it be contracts, as you saw when you were in in office, or things like tax breaks, tax advantages. So
Right.
are there structural things?
Protections, right.
Exactly. So are there structural things we can do? I'll give you a quick suggestion, for example, which actually steps back and says, instead of playing with the campaign finance laws, except for disclosure, which I think most people agree there should be total transparency in who's donating
That
money.
would solve a lot.
In what I don't know if it'd solve a lot, but it would certainly, hopefully, begin the process of at least having some type of accountability, which
Yeah.
we've lost. But what if, for example, you said, we're going to move to, I'll give you an example, a flat tax system. And you're not going to have tax credits. You're not going to have accelerated depreciation and all these special tax breaks. When you look at the amount of lobbying that occurs on the part of businesses in Washington for tax preferences and tax breaks, could that begin a process of making businesses less interested in government and allow it to return government to the people?
Sure. The less government is involved in deciding who are the winners and losers, the less government is involved in deciding, what benefits the taxpayers will provide to you or whatever, the less interest businesses are going to have in trying to play that game.
So
Absolutely.
why not step back, both Democrats and Republicans, and say, let's look at why there's so much corporate interest in government, and are there ways to decrease that interest? Because if we decrease that interest, their money isn't going to flow into campaigns.
I think that's true of the business world. It's true of the labor world. It is true with citizens generally, because why do educators, why do teachers flood the Washington offices of their members of Congress? Because of the federal money or the federal regulations of the federal. The more government where'd the Tea Party come from? People who said, whoa, government's in the middle of everything, and there's too much of it, and it's too expensive. What's interesting is I stood back and you looked at the Tea Party and the Occupy movement, and they're both saying the same thing, a slightly different emphasis. I think there are some fundamental mistakes in the way we have allowed our government system to be set up. And as government gets bigger and more complex, to some extent, corporations are trying to get benefits that they shouldn't get, and to some extent, they're trying to protect themselves against regulations that are harmful to them and to their customers.
Right, and that applies, I think, to individual citizens too.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about that and more. We're going to take our final break, and then we'll be back with Mickey Edwards.
Coming up next.
You can't make a democracy like ours survive with people locked into rigid ideologies and an unwillingness to talk to others.